She pulled it from the ground, and it came apart in her hands. Black, wet, rotting. She dug up another one. Same thing. Another. Same thing. She walked the entire field and dug up every plant she could reach, and every single one came apart the same way. Black mush that smelled like something had died underground. By the end of that summer, that smell would hang over all of Western Ireland. Never return. This is not a story about bad luck. This is a story about a single food that lifted an entire civilization, traveled the world in secret, survived fear and superstition and government bans and religious condemnation, and then, in one catastrophic failure, helped reshape the entire population map of the modern world. And it starts not in Ireland, not in Europe, not anywhere most people would think to look. Mountains, 8,000 years ago, high in the Andes, above 12,000 feet, where the air is thin and the nights drop below freezing even in summer, something small and ugly was growing in the rocky soil. Wild potatoes, and they were nothing like what you're imagining. They were roughly the size of a walnut. They were bitter enough to make your face collapse, and they contained solanine and tomatine, natural toxins that cause vomiting, cramps, and in high enough doses, death. These things were not food. Eating one raw was dangerous. But the indigenous peoples of the Andes didn't give up. Over many generations, they figured out something remarkable. If you soaked the wild tubers in cold mountain streams for several days, the running water would pull the toxins out. Then, if you exposed the softened potatoes to the brutal high-altitude cold, repeating cycles of freeze and thaw, you could break down the remaining poisons entirely. It was a multi-day process requiring patience that most of us cannot imagine. But it worked. And then, generation by generation, Andean farmers did something that would take European scientists thousands of years to even describe with proper language. They selected the least bitter tubers at harvest. They replanted only those, year after year, century after century. Slowly, carefully, they bred the poison out. They bred the starch in 1400s. By the time the Inca Empire rose to dominate Western South America in the 1400s, the potato had become something extraordinary. Inca farmers, working the terraced fields carved into the mountainsides around Cusco, cultivated over 3,000 distinct varieties. Yellow, purple, red, blue. Some so dark they looked almost black. Some smooth and round. Some gnarled and twisted in shapes that would make a modern grocery store manager nervous. Each variety was engineered, without that word, for a specific altitude, a specific soil, a specific climate. The Inca didn't just grow potatoes. They built an agricultural science around them. But here is the part that should genuinely stun you, and this is the part of the potato's history that most people never learn about. Here is how it worked. After harvest, farmers would spread potatoes on flat ground at high altitude and let them freeze solid overnight. The next morning, as the intense equatorial sun warmed the mountainside, they would walk barefoot across the frozen potatoes, stomping out the moisture with their feet. Freeze, stomp, freeze, stomp. They repeated this for 5 days. What was left was a light, chalky, bone-dry block called chuño, a Quechua word meaning frozen potato. It weighed almost nothing. Some records suggest more than 50 years. This was arguably the first processed food in all of human history, and it was a logistical miracle that fed Inca armies on campaigns across 40,000 kilometers of mountain roads. Now here is the part that makes this even more remarkable. That same principle, freeze-drying, is used today in modern science labs around the world to preserve vaccines, blood plasma, and medications. The Inca figured it out 600 years before refrigeration existed. While making chuño, Inca farmers applied the same freeze-drying technique to meat, creating a preserved produce they called charqui. That word traveled with the Spanish across the Atlantic and eventually became, in English, the word jerky. Every time you eat beef jerky, you are eating a product named after an Inca food preservation technique from the Andes Mountains. This was not just a crop, it was the foundation of one of the largest empires in the pre-Columbian Americas, and its technology is still with us today. 1570. The world's worst first impression. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in South America in the 1530s, they were hunting for gold and silver. They found both in staggering quantities. What they barely noticed, and didn't value at all, was the ugly little tuber the people they were conquering ate at nearly every meal. A few potatoes were carried back to the Iberian Peninsula around 1570. Nobody celebrated. No royal proclamation was made. Potatoes went to sailors as cheap anti-scurvy rations. They were donated to hospitals as food for the sick and the poor. The Spanish crown, which was busy counting Inca gold, had no interest in a vegetable from people they considered beneath them. When the potato finally reached the rest of Europe in the late 1500s and early 1600s, the reaction was not curiosity, it was revulsion. You have to understand the world these people lived in. Europeans grew wheat, barley, and rye. These were noble crops. They grew above ground, in the sunlight, reaching toward God. Bread made from grain was considered a sacred gift. Entire economies, entire feudal structures, entire civilizations were organized around grain cultivation. The potato grew underground, in the dirt, in the dark, and it belonged to the same plant family as deadly nightshade, one of the most poisonous plants in Europe. To deeply religious, superstitious societies, this was not a botanical coincidence. This was a message from God. In 1748, not long after it arrived, the Paris Parliament formally declared the potato unfit for human consumption and banned its cultivation. Physicians linked its knobby underground shape to leprosy, syphilis, and in some accounts, demonic influence. The Parliament of Besançon had banned it earlier, in 1596, for the same reasons. The Russian Orthodox Church called it the devil's apple. In Germany and Switzerland, people blamed it for causing tuberculosis-like swellings and what they called general moral corruption. Scottish Presbyterians refused to eat it because the word potato appears nowhere in the Bible, and therefore, God could not have intended it for human consumption. That was not something anyone invented. That was a real theological argument made by real clergymen in real churches. For nearly 200 years, the potato sat in European gardens as a curiosity. Wealthy households grew it for the flowers. Marie Antoinette reportedly wore potato blossoms in her hair at French court events. Scholars wrote papers debating whether the tuber was medicinal or dangerous, but actually eating it on a regular basis, that was beneath the dignity of any respectable European. Bread was civilized. Potatoes were for animals, or for the desperately poor. It looked like the potato would die in Europe, feared, mocked, and rejected. Then war changed everything. Frederick the Great. Prussia, 1756. His problem was simple. Enemy armies kept burning his wheat fields to starve his people into surrender. Grain burns. You torch it and walk away. But a crop growing 6 inches underground, an invading army could march straight across a potato field and never know dinner was beneath their boots. Frederick issued the Kartoffelbefehl, the potato order: plant potatoes or face consequences. The peasants refused. Kolberg village sent the king a message: the potato has neither taste nor smell, and not even dogs will eat it. Frederick didn't argue. He planted a royal potato garden outside Berlin and posted armed guards around it. Day only, no explanation, just guards. The message landed without a single word. If the king needs soldiers to protect this plant, it must be worth stealing. Prussian peasants started sneaking in at night to take the seed potatoes, which was exactly what he wanted. History calls him the Potato King. People still leave potatoes on his grave in Potsdam. Antoine Augustin Parmentier. Now, France. France required a different approach entirely. A pharmacist named Antoine Augustin Parmentier had spent 5 years as a prisoner of war in Prussia. His captors fed him almost nothing but potatoes, day after day, for 5 years. He didn't get leprosy. He didn't lose his mind, or his morals, or his appetite. He came home, if anything, in better health than soldiers who had eaten the standard French military diet. And Parmentier looked at his country. a country that had officially declared the potato unfit for human consumption, that had banned its cultivation by parliamentary decree, that had sent men to prison for growing it. And he decided that what France needed was not a law. What France needed was a dinner party. He hosted elaborate dinners for Parisian high society, where every single course, from the first bite to the last, was made from potatoes. He gave potato flowers to King Louis XVI, who wore one in his buttonhole at court. He convinced Marie Antoinette to wear them in her hair at royal events. Then he planted a potato field outside Paris, posted guards during the day, and quietly removed them every night, so curious Parisians would sneak in and steal the crop. The man ran an influence operation for a root vegetable, and it worked. Today France honors him with hachis parmentier, the classic dish that still bears his name. A Paris metro station, a boulevard, a hospital. He gave his life to a potato. France gave his name to history. But while Frederick was tricking peasants, and Parmentier was throwing dinner parties, something far darker was already building across the English Channel. Something no trick and no dinner party could stop. Ireland in the 1700s was under British colonial rule. The vast majority of Irish land belonged to English landlords, who often lived in England and never set foot on the estates they owned. Irish Catholic tenant farmers worked tiny plots, 1 acre, maybe 2, on rocky, boggy soil. They could be evicted at any moment. The potato was almost perfectly designed for this brutal situation. 1 acre of potatoes could feed a family of 6 for an entire year. No grain came close. The potato grew in the poor, wet Irish soil where wheat failed. It needed no plough, no horse, no mill. Just a spade, some seed potatoes, and rain, which Ireland never lacked. A family could survive on potatoes and buttermilk alone, and the nutritional balance of that diet, as strange as it sounds today, was genuinely complete enough to sustain life. That astonishing growth was the potato. But there was a catastrophic flaw built into all of it, and anyone who understood agriculture could see it coming. Nearly all of Ireland's potatoes came from a single variety called the Irish lumper. One type, planted everywhere, in every county, on every acre, which meant one thing. If a disease could kill one plant, it could kill every plant in Ireland simultaneously. There was no genetic diversity to fall back on, no resistant variety waiting in reserve, no plan B. The entire food supply of an entire nation rested on a single genetic line of a single crop. The clock was already ticking. Ireland just couldn't hear it yet. In late summer of 1845, a cargo ship from the Americas docked at a European port. Hidden within its cargo were microscopic spores of an organism called Phytophthora infestans, a water mold that thrived in exactly the cool, wet conditions that defined the Irish climate. The blight swept through Belgium and the Netherlands, then England, then it crossed to Ireland. Plants that looked perfectly healthy in the morning were black, wilted, and rotting by evening. Farmers dug up tubers, hoping to salvage something. They found foul-smelling pulp instead. The stench of decay in counties like Mayo, Galway, and Clare became so overwhelming that people tied cloths over their faces just to breathe. The first year was devastating. What turned a bad harvest into an apocalypse was that the blight came back. 1846, 1847, 1848. Year after year, the same result. Black fields, empty homes, bodies on the roadside. While Irish families starved in ditches beside their dead fields, Ireland continued to export grain, butter, and livestock to England. Under armed military guard, food was leaving a starving country, under military protection, by government policy. Charles Trevelyan, the senior British Treasury official overseeing famine relief, wrote in official government correspondence, not in private, in official correspondence, that the famine was the judgment of God on an indolent and unself-reliant people, and that, as God had sent the calamity to teach the Irish a lesson, that calamity must not be too much mitigated. He wrote that while his government was shipping food out of Ireland, between 1845 and 1852, roughly 1 million Irish people died of starvation and disease. Another million fled on ships so overcrowded and disease-ridden, they became known as coffin ships. Passengers died by the dozens during the Atlantic crossing, and bodies were thrown overboard. Ireland's population dropped by roughly 25% in less than a decade. And here is the number that makes it permanent. Today, nearly 180 years later, Ireland's population is still lower than it was before the famine struck. Not just recovering slowly, still lower. 1 million people dead, another million gone. And the potato, the thing at the center of all of it, was still just getting started. If you want to know where this goes next, hit subscribe. We cover the hidden histories of the ordinary things in your life every week. Stay with us. The million Irish immigrants who fled didn't just disappear. They reshaped the world they landed in. They poured into Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. They faced discrimination and anti-Catholic hostility. And they built labor movements, political machines, and communities that would shape American politics for the next century and a half. They settled in Liverpool, Glasgow, Melbourne, and Toronto. They carried with them a generational rage toward the British government that fueled Irish nationalist movements for decades, and eventually contributed to Irish independence in 1922. The Great Famine didn't just empty Ireland. It planted Irish communities, Irish culture, and Irish grief across the entire English-speaking world. The reverberations of that scattering are still visible today, in Boston's political dynasties, in the Irish pubs of Melbourne, in the murals on the walls of Belfast. And the strange part, the part nobody expects, is what happened next to the potato itself. The lesson the world took from Ireland was not, potatoes are dangerous. The lesson was, never stake a civilization on one genetic line of one crop. Plant breeders across Europe and the Americas began developing new varieties with resistance to Phytophthora infestans. Agricultural scientists built seed diversity programs. The disaster that nearly destroyed Ireland became the foundation of modern scientific plant breeding. Russia had its own battles. Catherine the Great tried forcing potato cultivation in the 1760s. Russian peasants rioted. They burned fields and attacked government officials. The government won in the end. By the early 1900s, Russia was one of the largest potato producers on Earth. Rural communities gave it a revealing new nickname, the second bread. In China, the potato sat as a curiosity for centuries, until highland farmers in provinces like Yunnan and Sichuan realized it could grow where rice and wheat couldn't survive at all. Today, China is the largest potato producer on Earth. Over 90 million metric tons every single year. India is second. Kenya, Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Uganda have national potato programs backed by the United Nations. Because in the cool highlands of East Africa, the potato grows better than almost anything else. Globally, the potato is now the fourth most important food crop on the planet, behind wheat, rice, and corn. More than 300 million metric tons produced annually across more than 150 countries. McDonald's uses over 3 billion pounds of potatoes every year, just for fries. Potato starch is used in manufacturing paper, textiles, adhesives, and biodegradable plastics. Vodka has been distilled from potatoes in Poland, Russia, and Scandinavia for centuries. During World War II, German chemists converted potato starch into synthetic rubber for military vehicle tires. When Japanese forces cut off natural rubber supplies from Southeast Asia, and in 1995, the potato became the first vegetable ever grown in outer space. NASA and the University of Wisconsin successfully cultivated potato plants aboard Space Shuttle Columbia as part of research into feeding crews on long-duration missions. Here is what I keep coming back to. 8,000 years ago, people in the Andes were eating something poisonous, and instead of giving up, they spent generations making it safe. They freeze-dried it. They fed armies with it. They built a civilization on it. Then Europe spent 200 years refusing to eat it. Parliaments banned it. Churches condemned it. Villages sent kings messages saying even the dogs wouldn't touch it. And then one mold, One microscopic organism that nobody could see showed up in Ireland in 1845, and because an entire nation had collapsed its food supply onto a single genetic variety of this one crop, 1 million people died. That is the part that stays with me. Not the famine itself, as devastating as it was, but the decision that made it inevitable. The slow, quiet narrowing. One crop, one variety, no backup. Because that pattern didn't end in 1845. Right now, today, 3 crops, wheat, rice, and corn, feed the majority of the human population on Earth. And scientists who study agricultural collapse say the same thing about the modern food system that anyone paying attention could have said about Ireland in 1844. The potato didn't just teach us how to feed the world, it showed us exactly how civilizations starve, and we keep almost learning that lesson. The potato in your kitchen right now descended from survivors, from plants that outlasted blight and fear, and parliament bans, and 2 centuries of European contempt. It is not a humble vegetable. It never was. If this history hit differently than you expected, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us which part you had absolutely no idea about, because we're just getting started.